Hello and welcome to an In Conversation podcast. This is the first podcast where I'm speaking with a young guy who is known simply as Derek, and I hope that it won't be the last conversation we have. Several months ago, actually about half a year ago, Derek got in touch with me by email and out of the blue wanted to ask some questions and share some thoughts with a like-minded person. I responded to Derek and some of the emails became quite lengthy. In fact, in the end we began to send audio messages to each other because the emails were getting longer and longer. And then Derek disappeared for a while. And then about 2 weeks ago, he got back in touch again and said he had some other thoughts on his mind and could we connect and have an audio chat. So I agreed, and it was the first time that we had spoke live with each other. And I suggested that why don't we record the conversation, and then at the end of it we can decide that if we felt that it could be of benefit for any other listeners, that we can make it available and gain benefit from the ideas we had shared. At the end of our conversation, which was around 1 hour, Derek agreed that it was something we could share. We discussed the themes which Derek had on his mind were based around frequency and vibration and resonance, and how that affects a person and their interaction with the world around them, and also the question on cycles of time. And a few other things as well came into the conversation. It was a free-flowing, unscripted conversation, and I found Derek to be an eloquent speaker, and I think these ideas are on many people's minds, and therefore I hope that it would be of benefit to other listeners to make this available. So now I'll pass it over to where we had just started in the early moments of our conversation. Well, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned that you wanted to speak about two things. One, I think, was cycles, time cycles, and the other one was frequency. I think you mentioned frequency. In
Yes.
general.
I think, right. So I have my notes present about those things. I was just going with the spur of the moment meeting of us. And I think the fact that I wanted to go outside to discuss these things, away from people who maybe aren't sympathetic. That was the word I was looking for earlier, sympathetic, which is a very resonant word.
Mm-hmm.
It indicates sort of something that is very central to my interest in frequency, my interest in reaching out to you, which is that most of the world is not sympathetic to my intention of raising myself above the material dross, and I'm conscious, and it's something that maybe when I was younger I would be more frustrated and angry about, but now I've sort of learned to understand that it's not really something that people are doing with necessarily malicious intention. It's sort of like they have a programming which forces them to do it almost automatically, which is that they will sort of become very hostile towards me if I make it very clear that I have very different, and you could say, I don't like the way that society operates and I think it should be changed. And I'm very aware that this is sort of can very easily make people very hostile towards me, and so I've learned to kind of keep it to myself. And this goes along with the frequencies. So maybe that's a good place to begin.
Yeah, and it's very relevant and apt for these times because that is what's going on. And as you say, I mean, to respond in kind of frustration and anger is actually playing into it, because that brings you right into the heavy energies that you're trying to break away from anyway. And I think this is a dilemma, because most people are are just unaware of how things operate. And so, because they adhere to the system and are part, and they place themselves within the kind of mainstream systems, they don't realize they're propagating that frequency because they don't perceive on that level. They just think, they just think about everyday life, getting up, going to work. What you see is what you get, and when you're dead, you're dead. And so, they think that to talk about frequencies and I'm not on your wavelength is a bit kind of esoteric, for most people. So you can't approach them directly. It's like, as they say, any every nail that stands up gets hit down by the hammer. You're making yourself a target if you try to go directly. And frequencies are very subtle, and it's about navigating them. And the first step in navigation, I would say, is to recognize and perceive that these are how they operate. And I kind of refer to it as a split reality syndrome. Is that you're physically located in the same reality. You have your roommates. You're standing next to someone, but you're perceiving or inhabiting a different reality space. And that's how you got to think of it. You're in this, you're in the world, but you're not in the same world as the masses or most people. So therefore, you've got to try and find those people we call like-minded. That that's what we say. You're on the same wavelength. You're on the same vibe. So we use that vocabulary. We just don't often think that it has a reality to it, but it does. Um, so that's the first thing I'd say there, is that it is an actual phenomenon, and you have to realize that societies. Well, there's a there's a kind of a non-intentional part where societies just have to keep running. They have to manage themselves, so they have to manage the mainstream narratives, and that just brings you down to a lower vibration or a heavier frequency. But I would say there's also some aspects that are those frequencies are deliberately put there. There's no accident that we get, such atrocities in mainstream entertainment, in Hollywood, in the films, in the culture industries. There's no accident that they're put out in a certain way because they know they're putting out the lowest common denominator, the heavy frequencies, to get people hooked in. So that part I would say is deliberate.
Can you hear me well?
I can hear you when you speak. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought perhaps you had cut out there at the end
No,
abruptly.
I should say over to you then, shouldn't I?
We could do that. I like that. Yes. I've certainly learned not to explicitly explicitly go against these sort of things. It's all about holding the internal state to where I want to be. And yeah, I will say over to you because I tend to pause a lot and allow the words to come to me. So yeah, it's holding the internal state to where I want to be, and that is the tuning of the frequency. A lot of the things you just said were right in rapport with a lot of the things that I had been writing in both our emails and these notes that I've been taking that are so important to discuss here. I'll say over to you as I think about the specifics of, because there was a lot of things that you said there which I wanted to comment on, but I'm sort of having to wait a moment. So if there's anything that you want to say, please.
Well, I mean, I would continue that by saying, the first reaction generally is when you get aware of these events is that you want to pull yourself away, extricate yourself, and get as far away as possible. But that's not. I don't think that's the solution because you still have to operate in the world. You still have to get by. We don't. It's very hard to go and live on a mountaintop or in a cave. So the trick generally is living amongst people, but uh, seem to be seemingly like everybody else, seemingly normal, and you always get certain, let's say, bands of people or cults who want to identify themselves as being different from the system, whether they have certain uh, clothes, certain rituals, certain way of behavior, because they like to stand out, and that has a function for those people. But I would say that the most in the most functional, operative way to exist is just to be in society on the whole, but not to be noticed because exterior wise you seem normal like everybody else, but you're actually interior wise you are operating on a different frequency. So,
Yes,
do you, Derek?
I couldn't agree more there. I often form this particular sentiment in my head around Star Wars analogy. I'm sure you've seen the old Star Wars movies, and this is the older ones. I'm sure you've seen them, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. You mean the good ones?
Indeed. So in those times, the Empire has a firm hold over the galaxy, and it's not wise to draw attention to yourself as a rebel. The rebels have to operate, I wouldn't say, you could say in secrecy, but really in plain sight. You can't identify yourself as someone in any explicit way as someone who's trying to resist. And I think that's very apt for our times because, in my estimation, the empire has certainly taken over. It's got quite a grip over day to day proceedings. Over to you.
All right. Wasn't sure if that was a pregnant pause. No, you're right. A couple of points there. I think on one side, yes, that is the way to go. Is that generally to pass unnoticed in a foreign country, let's say, is that you wear the dress or the costume, the garb of the country you're visiting. So, in a sense, that's the way to go. Is if you don't really want to draw attention to yourself because it kind of gets in the way of doing your own work, of trying to figure things out for yourself and to develop yourself. You don't want unwanted attention or people to think you're a weirdo, or so you have to kind of put on the costume of where you're at in order to be left, given the peace to work on yourself. And the second point is about the Star Wars. This idea of light and darkness and the mythology, it is much a lot more visible today, I think, than before. And any kind of Star Wars fans would know that George Lucas, used the mythology of Joseph Campbell, and I think he was an advisor on the series. And Joseph Campbell, very well known for the hero with a thousand faces, and for kind of giving the Western world the hero's journey mythology, explaining that about how the hero has to go through these trials and tribulations to go through the dark underworld tunnel and to kind of face the shadows and the dark side before coming out into the light and being of benefit to their culture and society. So that idea of the hero's journey is actually embedded into the Star Wars mythology, and I think that's another element that is a part of our culture and societies. Over to you, Derek.
Yes, it is. It brings up the challenge of holding on to the frequency, the good frequency, the light frequency, the uplifting frequency in a world that is sort of bent on bringing us down. And I'll say, maybe I can word that better because there's a danger, I think, of sounding oversimplified, like I would say the world is sort of bent on, well, I sort of think it's a matter of energy. And I kind of get this feeling that the way society is set up now is that the energy that everybody puts out is sort of gathered up and harvested and shipped up to people who can take advantage of that energy because we as people are never really taught how to manage our energy and to notice and to see and to direct it in ways that might be more beneficial to us as individuals. And so instead of having people who can, use their energy on a daily basis in things that will help them, the society is bent on t- uh, hijacking our attention, and so that we put our energy into whatever it has to offer, fleeting pleasures which really don't give us anything, but there's, endless products, endless. And here in America, it's over the top how just every, there's everything is commodified, and this has been said, and it's well known, but it's worth stating here. And so society as it is now, and it's very good at disempowering us, and so that it sort of it keeps us low and unhappy so that we keep feeding into it. And the result of that is that it's very challenging for one to hold a high internal state, because everyone around you, if they notice what you're doing, if they notice that you're trying to do your own thing, they have a tendency, of course, to try and kind of cut you down for that. And this is something that we've already discussed, so I don't want to go too far into it, because it's easy to feel bad for oneself in that way, and it's of course not constructive. But yes, the challenge, I think this is where we're going here, or I'm trying to go with this, the challenge of holding that internal frequency, which is different from the way that we've all been educated, or you could say indoctrinated into, we think we've been educated that it's a good thing to work for some large company and have a good job, and then the things that life is for enjoyment when you're not at work, which is of course just feeding into the endless commodity chain. And so to do it differently now is it seems quite a challenge. I'll leave it there. Over to you.
Yeah, I think there's important points, Derek, and I think they're worth talking about, because this, everyone's aware of consumption and that we live in a consumer society, especially in the industrialized societies. But of course, people don't generally see that only in terms of materialistic, physical terms, i.e., we go out and we buy something and we've been forced to keep consuming and keep rebuying, so we stay in the kind of credit debt system.
Yeah, that's
But of
perfect
course,
that
yeah.
you go and take it more subtly, because it is much more subtle than just the simple. Sorry, I
Oh,
needed
yeah.
to interject.
No, it's fine, and it's right, because we're all at all times our gaze um,
Yes,
is being pushed outward, the outward gaze. So we
yes,
only see
yes.
the physical
It's
side.
attention. It's
Yeah,
attention. It's not simply material. We get your money. It's all attention now. Of course, we know this, or we've seen this in the attention economy. But yes, sorry. Go ahead.
Mm.
I'm excited.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's true because, um, of course, yeah, they don't. I mean, the consumer society at the top level is not about money, because they own money. Money is something which is just a kind of energy exchange. That's what money is, energy exchange. Um, and of course, if we're focused on the external side, we don't see the subtleties of how we're being manipulated to give away our energies. In fact, the famous inventor Nikolai Tesla, he said, if you want to know about the secrets of the universe, learn about energy, vibration, and frequency. That's a famous quote. I mean, because these are the underlying kind of forces behind the physical manifestations. So really it's about, and of course, if you are an energy accumulator, society is an energy accumulator, you want as many people as possible to join your side, because each person is like an extra battery. So you don't want people to break away and take their energy elsewhere. You want them to give energy to you. So
You
that's what.
perfectly uh, taken what I was trying to say and crystallized it further, because yes, I feel like I wanted to say so. This is why it's so tricky. It's so tricky to talk about these things, because it isn't, and we're ready to talk about them, you and I. And it's why I have trouble in bringing these things to others, because it isn't a matter of simple one-to-one material. I have this one-to-one, I can point it out materially. It's a much more subtle, it's all about the energetic harvest. And society is so airtight now with its energetic harvest. That's what I'm talking about when I say that the empire is taken over.
Yeah. And you mentioned before your interest in Gurdjieff. Well, to go back to Gurdjieff, he spoke a lot about this, and saying that the human being is kind of like robbed of all their energy throughout the day. So at the end of the day, they have no energy for themselves and no energies for their own inner development because they've used it all up. So what he was saying is that a person must become aware so they retain energy also for themselves. I mean, you have to use energy as you navigate through daily life. That's just the kind of exchange you have to give, you know. You give energy when you walk, when you work, when you're in social relations and conversations, but you have to learn to retain enough energy for yourself. So each day, a percentage of the energy is left for you to utilize for your own perceptive development, because you know the act of perception requires energy. And if your energy is taken up by working throughout the day and then stuck in front of the television at night, you've got no energy for
None.
perception. You know,
None.
yeah, it's taken from you. And so to be aware of that is a first step in retaining your energy. And the person who retains more energy is more liable to be able to have the capacity to perceive these things we're talking about. Over.
This is, yeah, perfect. This is going right along with the next topics that I have written down, and it's working out well. The process of taking back your energy, and how, yeah, the awareness is the first step, and then all throughout the day I find that small things which, as I become more aware of them, they can take less energy from me, which always just comes down to small, well, not always, but often in the aggregate comes down to small little things which I would be, if I'm not resonating on a high frequency, they can sap energy. It, and so, for instance, what we're doing now here, when you're operating with people who have a sympathetic resonance, it has that constructive interference effect, so that there's a knock-on effect, and I'll go and be motivated to keep going in this direction. And one of the difficult challenges that I face is that it's rare that someone is on the sympathetic frequency with me. And so I'll go for long stretches of trying to hold, or, successfully holding my frequency. Yet, after a long time without contact with someone who sort of, we feed off of each other, I can sort of lose the top end, and maybe slowly, as the process goes on, I fall down. I never fall all the way down, and I think as the process goes on, you fall less and less back down. But this is something that I've noticed.
Well, I'll come in there. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's why it pays to kind of be aware of this, because you're right. People can kind of suck your energy. Like, I've referred to them as like psychic vampires. They may not mean to, and most of the time they're not even aware of they're doing it, because some people just drain you. Some people exhaust you. But it's right that sympathetic energies, um, they grow, they expand, they exhilarate. So imagine like let's say an energy graph, and you have a wave. So you have the kind of the wave going up, and then you have the trough. Yeah, the wave going down. So if you enter a conversation with someone and you are the kind of the wave going up, and the other person is the trough, when you meet, you cancel each other out. What do you get? A straight line, nothing. So you neutralize or they may drag your energy down into the trough if their trough is stronger than your peak.
Yeah.
See? But if you get two people meeting, and both of them are on the energy peak wavelength, two peaks together get a greater peak, an expansion. And that's why you feel vitalized and energized and activated. So you see, two sympathetic energy lines coming together expands the energy, and two opposed energy lines either cancel each other out, or you can get dragged down in it. So just from a simple kind of science of energy vibration wavelengths, you can see how this can affect us. So if you're let's say if you're in a social scene and you feel like you don't fit in with the vibe or the energy of where you are, if you can't, okay, you may not be able to physically leave because you're with someone or friends, then you have to learn to kind of disconnect your attention away from what's going on around you, And just by disconnecting your attention, you actually cut off that kind of energy connection, which means you're conserving or protecting your energy. So someone may kind of come up to you and start a conversation, but you're not really that, you're not connecting with them. You may say pleasantries and that, but you're not getting sucked into their conversation, especially if it's a conversation that you're not interested in. They want to talk about the latest Hollywood films, or let's talk about Barbie. You're not interested in that, so you disconnect, and that conserves your energy, because once you connect with it, then the entrainment, basically, it's like two musical instruments coming together. If one instrument is on a lower key, then if you start a conversation with that instrument, you get tuned into their key entrainment, and that's what can lower and basically exhaust your energies. Derek, over.
Right. I would continue this by saying that the energy game, or the energy game, for lack of a better word, is so expertly played now that to hold the frequency of self-empowerment, individual, I, it's hard because you know what I mean. The energy of empowerment it does require very close attention and daily work to better yourself every day in becoming less. And really, it is that sort of Gurdjieffian sense of becoming less and less attached or connected to things that are draining your energy. And I suppose I was going to bring up something which I was reminded of when you talked about Barbie or about the Hollywood machine, is that the energy harvesting and the energy grabbing machine of society is so cunning. It's almost it's abominably cunning these days. It's so good at it that it's the technology. This is another thing that recurs in our email chains and in my notes for what I wanted to speak about today, is that the technology that we have now is so subtly potent. It's very subtly potent because people, again, they can think of it as simply a physical implement. If you just think of a smartphone as a physical thing, then it maybe isn't quite obvious how powerful it is. But if you think about how good these smartphones are at holding our attention, you realize that most people are plugged into the attention harvesting thing 99% of the day. They don't even have to be looking at their phones to be plugged into this thing, because just the fact that their phones are near them is, they're quite they're on call for the machine. Over.
Yeah, and I like that phrase. What do you say? Abominably, what was it?
Abominably cunning.
Abominably cunning.
It's
Cunning. Yeah.
hideous. I mean, I
Hideously cunning. Abominably, hideously cunning.
yes.
You're spot on, and that's why it's so important and so necessary to have vigilance. Um, and actually, vigilance is a kind of, it's like a physical muscle. You know, if if you start to lift weights, your muscles start to ache because it's not used to it. And the more you lift weights, your muscles get used to it, and the exercise is easier. And vigilance is a similar thing, but it's an exercise of perception and attention. But the more you utilize it, the more it comes naturally, and the more you find yourself to be vigilant, with less um, with less energy needed to do that, because it comes more naturally to you. So I'd say that. And you're right. It's because a lot of these dominant social forms have been hijacked. So what starts out as you know a certain, let's say, a platform or a tool which has a lot of good usage and can, is quite neutral in the beginning, gets hijacked to become a nefarious
Mm.
energy accumulator or stealer. And you're right. When these devices of communication, let's say digital communications slash internet, to be a kind of, the basic model, it was for connecting people across the world, decentralized connections, and without going through, a top-heavy platform. But then it got hijacked, and so then these devices get used for, as you say, there's like mini attention stealers, and you carry it around in your pocket. You have it all day in the house or wherever you go. The society has now recalibrated itself. So for most people, it's kind of impossible to go even leave the house without a phone. You need it now to navigate your car with the maps. You need it to pay because they use phone payments. You need it to do constant messaging with your partner or something. So it's because your dependency slowly gets kind of taken over and taken over to a point where you don't realize how you've embedded this thing into your lives, and then you lose vigilance. So it's still tools we need. I mean, I use a phone every day and the internet, etc. But it's a matter of vigilance to use it instead of them using you. And this is the equation which has become very lopsided in our societies, is that people get used without being aware of it. And we have to learn to be the users, not the used. And that's the main point there. Over.
Once again, you've anticipated a bullet point which I hadn't gotten to yet, which was in my notes, and that was the way that when these things began, they were more geared towards individual empowerment. And in fact, if you read a lot, and I think you're familiar with Eric Davis, maybe. He is someone who I feel like I discovered around the same time of you and Jason Horsley. I don't know how all of these are related, but I think it's just that I discovered. It was around the time of COVID when I was looking for sanity. And I don't know if I feel that Eric Davis maybe went along with the program more than, for instance, you and Jason, but that's not really part of what I was saying, which is that in the early days, these people who began the internet, a lot of them were really into this really out there Hinduism and Buddhism, these really out there ideas, which are very sympathetic with what we've been talking about today. And when they began, there really was this idea of empowering us. And if you even think about the setup of a traditional computer, the way it has a keyboard, it's more inviting for you to input your thoughts into it. You input something and get something out of it. Just the fact that there's a keyboard shows, it's very telling the way that the physical object manifests what the intention behind it is. If there's a device with a keyboard, then it's clear that the intention is for you to put something into it. And search engines back in the day, instead of giving you all this nonsense, you put something in and it gave it back to you. But now almost anyone that uses the internet, it's totally reversed, so that there's these small screens which have it's not conducive to type on these small screens. Clearly, you only can fit your thumbs. There's no, it's just less inclined for you to put into it, and it's just a screen, and it just shows you things that, well, I mean, I hate to say but it just shows you things that they want you to see. And it's the same with, you can't really access the internet anymore without going through their platforms, without using their search engines, without using their social media apps. And all of these things make it so that no longer do you have untampered with access to the wealth of knowledge, information, and connection. Now it's more like they railroad you into seeing what they would like you to see. It's a very stark difference, and there's a certain relationship to this which is important, which is, it shows that the power of these devices is so strong that the potential for liberation is huge. The potential for information is huge. I think without the internet, I would not be this kind of person who has heard and read and learned all of these things. And yet, for the most part, it's unless you have that level of awareness, it gets, paradoxically, it's the exact inverse. Over.
Yes, I mean, I'm familiar with Eric Davis. His seminal work, Technosis, was, a great piece of work. And I think, talking of technosis, technology and religion are kind of similar in that regard. And when you come to understand how this process functions, it doesn't come so much as a surprise. And how it functions, technology and religion and anything else which comes into the physical realm, is that Um, it comes in, any kind of new intervention comes in with a fresh energy. It comes in uncorrupted. But of course, once it's in the environment, it starts to take on the energy of the environment and it starts to get corrupted, and it
Beautiful,
only has a certain time span before its usefulness is diminished,
beautiful.
and and then over time the usefulness diminishes increasingly. So, and that's why, for example, we can see it as the law of entropy, is that something starts out dynamic and kinetic, and then it moves towards being crystallized and static and stagnant. So, religions come in, and often in the beginning, initial days, their impulse is very kinetic, a very, what I refer to as a developmental impulse. And over time, the energy of this realm kind of crystallizes it into forms of power and hierarchy and control, and the church establishment wanting material control rather than spiritual uh, liberation. And the same thing with technology. It comes in first as a kinetic force of activation and developmental potentials, but it has a certain time before it gets corrupted by this material realm. And then that's when it starts to get hijacked. So, we have to realize that this is just a kind of law that operates in this realm. And so we realize that things over time get diminished in their capacity to be of use or before they get hijacked, and therefore to be on the lookout for something new that comes along that may have potential before it gets diminished or hijacked. And technology is the same. It comes in, internet have a great potential for liberating people and it still has a great potential. It's just not a pure potential. It's been corrupted to a certain degree. But the point is, a lot of people have been directed into the corruptive elements like Instagram and looking at your phone all the time and pouting and taking selfies and counting how many likes you've got whilst you're driving a car and having a near miss accident. You know, but there's other people that are using it like now for having a constructive conversation. So, but we have to realize that these elements are all present in anything. But you have to focus and find the constructive elements and not being pulled into the corrosive elements. Over.
I I say beautiful, perfect. This is so many things at once here that are pinging off here, and I feel that there's all these tangents which come together in the general trend, which is never in this I'll say quickly here. As soon as something comes into physical manifestation, if you make the mistake of holding then to the physical as though the spiritual intention behind it is now actualized, then you're going to get swept away. I see it sort of as like a river. So the source of the river is always the source of the river. And if you grab hold of the pure water right as it comes out of the stream, then you're going to follow that water all the way to the end where it becomes, mixed with all the rest of the sediment. And if instead you cling to the source, which never manifests, this is perhaps an imperfect analogy, but I think you understand. If instead you hold to the source, the spiritual source of things, and never think that in the material universe you see it, that I think is the key. And I think this is taught about in certain religions, which I want to pivot to in just a moment. But I feel like there's so much that could be said about technology between us, but we can go into that. Or I was reminded here, and I'll pivot into the Lord of the Rings. I already brought up Star Wars. All these things are so important to me because they contain these big truths within them, of course, and that's a whole nother topic. But there's the thing in the Lord of the Rings called the Palantir, which is sort of something that you gaze into, and it can show you things far away from you. It can show you almost anything as you look into it. I mean, it's a perfect. It's alarmingly prescient here. It's the Palantir, and in the latter days, once the Dark Lord has risen to power, he has a Palantir, and anyone that dares to look into a different Palantir is quickly shown things that will hijack their intentions. So without them even knowing, they are shown the things that will bend them to his will. They don't realize that they're not being shown things in an impartial way. They're being shown things in a way that benefits the Dark Lord. And it takes one of the heroes of the story. I'm saying this for anyone, yourself included, who maybe has never read these things. One of the heroes of the story, one of a very pure and good character, and the true king, he's able to look into the Palantir without being overpowered by the will. And uh, I think that's very apt to what it means these days to look into the internet, because in my estimation, and I've sort of had dreams where I've seen this, like there's almost like this subtle voice whispering behind these screens that's just so it's so devious, it's so tempting. It's all about tempting us with whatever it can to get us on the wavelength of society. And in order to look at it and use these things in our um, to our individual aims as opposed to the way it wants us to do it, we have to be very, very extremely firmly established in a proper spiritual resonance. There is something else that I wanted to say, but over to you if there's anything that maybe came to your mind there.
Well, I mean, you said a lot of things, so I mean, I could just kind of respond to that before you move on. I mean, it's a good example, Lord
Oh,
of the Rings, and this is also, I mean, Philip K. Dick, a well-known science fiction writer, he was more known for like the pulp novels, before he became
yeah.
famous with his film adaptations. Um, and of course, and Philip K. Dick famously said that great kind of divine messages can be found amongst the pop trash. Um, so what he was saying was that, and this is the thing goes back to the source you mentioned, is that you can find examples of the intervention from the source, or what I call the metaphysical background to life, the metaphysical radiation that comes into life through physical forms, of course. The metaphysical source is always there in life, just that we don't see it. But it can manifest through certain forms, including pop culture. And I think Lord of the Rings is a case in point, and certainly through some of the work of Philip K. Dick and other works. And so this is a way of being fed certain kind of contact with these ideas in ways we don't see them coming. And I think that idea of the dark force and the Palantir trying to deceive our perception, what can be called the perception deception, is that's the whole trick. And is the trick is trying to dominate a certain perception of reality that people then kind of accept and become their belief system and their reality system, and that then feeds a certain narrative, feeds a certain energy, and then it's very, very difficult to break away from that, because it's very difficult to break away from the inside. You need interventions to become in, whether it's through messages or communications or nudges, to try to get you out, because it's very difficult to like pull yourself up by the bootstraps because you're in it. So I think this is a kind of struggle which is going on all the time. There's a heavier physical kind of realm, and there's metaphysical interventions coming in all the time and coming through. But we need to be aware of them, because we're under this kind of deceptive distraction all the time. So this is what is happening, and it's good that we can talk about this and point it out, because these things are all around us, but we need the nudges. So I'd say that for now. Move up.
I I yes. I think there's so much important things being said that it's sort of like there's endless potential, not endless, but very deep potential to carry on with any one of these topics. And so it's almost with some amount of regret that I switch topics, but I think there's a pivot point here into our other frequently recurring theme of the cycles of time, which is directly related to what we were just speaking of, in that things come into the material universe from the spirit, the infinite, endless spirit, in my conception, but it's not my conception, of course, in my understanding. And as they do, the material universe is sort of like the game board, where all ideas and all things are allowed to have their turn. And so the things that come in to the world from the source are then subject to the laws of the material, which are more limited than the infinite, which is unlimited. The material is like the limited game board where the infinite plays out all possibility. And so in this age, and I bring up now perhaps the Vedas, which are the source of what is now called Hinduism, these very old ideas which are still with us. And I bring those up because in my feeling, those are something which are so, they come, and if you even read the methodology which the people who wrote the Vedas had, you understand that their methodology was so, in my estimation, so good. Like it's such a perfect methodology that these things which are thousands of years old, still, if you go to them, they ring with the spirit like almost nothing else. And I, so what I mean to say is that even in this latter days of dark ages, far from the initial impulse, there's sort of an unbroken spiritual purity to a lot of the Vedas. In the Vedas, there's of course the talk of the cycles of time, which is that just this thing that we're talking about, which is that over time things become, I don't want to say corrupted, although you could use that word, but I prefer to use the word like maybe mixed. So instead of that pure spiritual impulse, it's mixed with the material impulse, which isn't a bad thing. I think the material, I mean, certain more Gnostic inclinations would say that the material universe is all bad, but I don't think that you or I share that sentiment. I think the material universe is the necessary um, counterpoint to the infinite spirit, although, and now I'm getting into hair splitting with theology, which I never intended to do, but yes, as time goes on, the material impulse kind of muddles the original impulse, which is clearly more spiritual. And of course, it's hard to think of these things because the spiritual impulse, the spirit, the infinite spirit, is inexhaustible and infinite and omnipresent. And so, really, it only appears that the material is gaining. It's sort of like the appearance of the material gains more reality, and people forget about the source. And these are the cycles of time, and these are something which are so compelling to me because they frequently pop up in our literature and in our, again, in this sort of, in the pop culture world. You see it again and again and again, and it's got this such a compelling ring to me. It's such an interesting thing that I just love to, well, think about it. Over.
Mm. Well, you said a lot there, and I think I mean, again, I'm trying to say things before I forget them, and I think that's a good analogy because the material realm is kind of the realm of forgetfulness, the realm of amnesia, and there's lots of myths about that, from Plato's myths of, when you incarnate in the material realm, you drink from the river of Lethe in the underworld that makes you forget things.
That's
And there's often myths in the Jewish Kabbalah saying that, before you incarnate, you are tapped by an angel, so you forget who you are. So the idea of we're in amnesia, and I think that's a way to explain that these cycles of time is that we go from periods of greater remembrance of our connection with source to greater distance away from it, and therefore greater amnesia. And these can be seen in the cycles of the Vedic cycles, as you mentioned, the Yuga cycles, because of course, going from the golden age to the dark age, they're all about the distance from source. And in the golden age, everything is in complete remembrance and connection with source. That's why it's seen as the paradise. And in the Kali Yuga, which is obviously the dark age, you're furthest away from source and remembrance. So it's not that, as you say, I agree with you that the physical domain is not bad. It's just, it is what it is, and it's a domain of amnesia, and therefore we have to work harder to regain that that recollection. And and I was reminded recently what was said in the Key of Solomon, the Wisdom of Solomon, and Solomon said, didn't know that there's nothing new under the sun. You know, what comes around again. So it's like this is part of the patterning that we move through these cycles in patterns, and you know the people those people who wrote the Vedas understood these patterns and tried to give an indication of them, and I think that's what's happening now is that we move through patterns and we move through these cycles, and it's not the first time, and we go from these states of awareness and greater contact with source and states of more forgetfulness, and it's not evil or bad or negative. It's things are in certain degrees of correspondence, and and we need correspondence, because if we don't correspond the light and the dark, we have no way of knowing what is light and what is dark, because there's no correspondence to indicate that. And we're moving through a time of correspondence, of moving from forgetfulness into greater remembrance, and that's the energy which is the energy we've talked about before, in this heavier dense energy of the culture and entertainment distraction, is an energy of forgetfulness. And when you're in sympathetic resonance, we're trying to regain remembrance, and that's we can include that in our perception of these cycles of time as well. I mean, there's other aspects of, there's physical aspects and features of what happens in these cycles, and as well as the energetic aspects, and we're talking, I think, more from a kind of consciousness perceptive aspect. So there's all interwoven, but it's a large subject, and I'm sure we can probably talk about cycles of time in the next talks as well, if you want to continue it. But just to touch upon it here and to respond to you, that's what came to my mind, Derek.
Yeah, this is perfect, and I would love to continue our talks in the future. I don't know how long you want to go here, but before we think about that, I wanted to grab on to something which came up and has been coming up, which is perhaps right now the most important thing for me, and probably by extension, a lot of people like me and yourself and sympathetic resonance, and why this cycle of time thing is so compelling to me, and why it's so it's such an inspiring thought to me. It's such a invigorating. It's always got me energetically when I notice it, because it sort of it reframes the apparent modern malaise, the gloomy world that I'm in. And I don't think it's doing it in a way that's sort of a false hope, or giving me some kind of some other fantasy to live in. I find very much truth in these things. Uh, it gives an important reminder of how that these times being what they are, it takes a lot of it takes the real effort that one makes is to find the source, the spirit, and hold yourself there. And that the material world now is so good at, so quickly is it able to, it's able to sort of catch you so far upstream now, whereas in previous times, a large section of the stream would have been preserved and been more calm. I think in these latter, more Kali Yuga-esque times, which I never would be one to say what Yuga we are in, but it's able to catch us so close to the stream, so close to the source of the stream. I think that's sort of it. To continue the analogy, this is it, is that as soon as something comes out from the source, now it's hijacked almost immediately, which is why that we see in a lot of this entertainment, there's in especially like these Netflix or Amazon shows, they're so close to containing these deep spiritual truths. And I think to myself, why would these malicious entities have any interest in spiritually educating the public? And my answer to myself is that they don't. The answer is that this is the false source. And so it just pulls people deeper and deeper into the Mm. Well, I suppose it pulls more and more people into the world. So even people who have a spiritual impulse are still mm, uh, interested by these shows, myself included, because they're so good. They're so good, but the problem for me, of course, is that they're still connected to this larger society, and so it's almost like some very enticing bait that they throw out there. But I think I've kind of gone into a tangent, and I wanted to say that this is the crux of what I'm going to take away today, is that, and it's the crux of the cycles of time, it's the crux of the frequency, which are both of the topics that I brought up as what I wanted to speak to you about, is that in as the material world right now is so drab and it's mundane, and that's just because we're in a later part of the cycle. And so those of us who remember, or who are remembering, must sort of preserve that spark, like one would carry a spark between long distances in order to start a fire in a new um, location. It takes a lot of care to maintain that spark, and it's easy to get discouraged and forget about it when everyone and everything around you is sort of hostile to the spark. It doesn't really have any interest in helping you to preserve that spark. And so we almost need to be able to harvest as much of our, or use as much of our energy as we can into preserving this inner flame, because so quickly, if you don't have this awareness, will you forget, and the spark will not, maybe not go out, but will get very low. The ember will burn very low. Over.
Yeah, you said some very good things there that I resonate with, so I wanted to pick up on that. And I think the idea of carrying the flame is very important, because that is what is happening in the way I kind of can perceive it as well, is that the flame is always kept alight. It never goes out entirely, because without the flame there wouldn't be life. And so the flame, is always in existence, but it's dimmed. It's dimmed more at certain points. Um, and yet the flame must be retained and then carried forth. It's like, for example, the analogy of the Dark Ages. When the Dark Ages came to Europe, um, and you had this kind of age of savagery and kind of barbarian behavior, um, then a lot of the learning and the wisdom went into these monastic retreats. And these monastic retreats were set up when they and during the Dark Ages, these thousands of these priests or kind of religious scholars were working hard to copy scrolls, to copy religious texts, to keep these things alive. So after the Dark Ages, after those several centuries, the knowledge could then be released once again into society. They kept their light low in order to be able to kind of pass it on at a later time when the world was more ready for that. And I think the similar thing is like we can consider ourselves carrying the flame, and that's why those people who are aware they're carrying it, that they kind of like almost are targets for distraction, because you could say there are certain elements that don't want those flames to
Yeah,
be
that
carried.
right there is
Mhm.
another a whole nother can of worms, you might say. Of that, I just wanted to interject very quickly.
Yeah.
That
So
specific sentiment is very interesting too.
well, maybe keep a hold on that for another conversation. And the other thing you said, which I think is very, very poignant, is about these these kind of these false manifestations of the spirit or spirituality, which kind of hook people in. And I've kind of talked about that in terms of false exits. And I kind of see it as like a revolving door. It's like, on these big hotels or big office buildings, you have the revolving door.
Yep.
And you think you enter it, and your aim is to go out, but if you're not quick enough, you get put on the door and you get pushed in again. And so these, what I see, all these spiritual programs, spiritual retreats, and all this stuff, which I call the kind of pop spirituality of the marketplace. It's a kind of, so the system allows a certain amount of anomalies, but just enough anomaly to kind of appease people, but not enough to wake them up, because I don't want people to be woken up. So these anomalies are like what I call the revolving door false exits. You enter the door, but without knowing it, you've been brought back into the system again.
Right.
But
It's a pressure release, because if enough people were discontent enough, then there would be a bulge in the dam, So it has to let out a
Exactly.
little bit of the pressure.
Exactly, just like bleeding a radiator to get the pressure out. So you go through the revolving door and you have a spiritual retreat or you watch a spiritual program and you're listening to some like sad guru spurting off online or something about whatever these kind of 101 pop spirit messages, and you feel relieved and you feel like you've had some nutrition, but it's like fast food nutrition. Is that a few minutes later you're hungry again, but
Yeah,
you've been satiated, so you've been appeased, and therefore
right.
you're happy to finish your day off, and you're not going into revolt mode. So that I think is happening. You pick that up, and I think that's important to kind of make a point of here.
Yes.
Mm.
This this is um let me see. So we were talking about the carrying of the spark, which is one thing. And then also then we sort of had this other pivot, which maybe has become the pivot that we will follow. And as I say, I don't have much to do today, but I don't want to occupy too much of your time or my own. I think there's a certain point which we can cut this off, but I'm not quite there yet, but any time is fine with me. So the concept here is people who have become more aware and who are trying to carry the spark are in a sense more of a target and are more juicy for the energy harvesting system, which is something that can be alarming when you first come into contact with it. I've had dreams, and I've brought this up before, where I sort of encounter this sort of entity, which is it has a very keen interest in me, and it has a very subtle touch of drawing me into it. And when I become aware that I've been drawn into it, I wake up with a huge fright and I don't go back to sleep because I really want to make sure that I don't forget that experience, because I think it's directly tied to this, which is that this sort of entity which is interested in keeping us down is very spiritually intelligent. It knows all of these things, and it's probably just operating through all of these kings of the earth to bring up that biblical sentiment. It's operating through them, and it sort of does have again, so people who are well established in the system, who have had all of their energy given away, in a sense, they're not as good batteries as people who have more of their own energy. So if you can get people to if you can grow people, the livestock analogy is almost too tempting to take. If you can grow people to being a fat pig and then slaughter them, it's much better than if you kind of keep them in a weak state. But unfortunately, but our society, I would say, keeps most of its livestock in a very weak state. And so when there's a pig that is more vibrant, it's all the more enticing to try and bring it in. I think you know what I mean.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the livestock analogy has been used many times, and there's stories about that. And even Gurdjieff told a good story about it called the shepherd, something to do with the shepherd's flock. And you may have heard of it. And Gurdjieff was saying like there was a shepherd who was looking after the sheep, but he had problems because the sheep were kind of running away, getting lost, falling off into the ravine and being killed. And so the shepherd was obviously losing his livelihood. So, he went to a local magician and said, look, a local sorcerer said, well, you're a kind of a wise sorcerer. Can you do something about this? And the sorcerer said, yes, sure. I've got a solution. So the sorcerer came up to the flock of sheep and hypnotized the sheep to make them believe that they were humans, and that some sheep thought that they were having a dutiful life, and some were hardworking, and some were enjoying life and lazing around. But they were hypnotizing to kind of accepting their lot and not wanting to run off or run away. And that was how the shepherd retained all his sheep. Now, that's a story, that's a good analogy, is that this life hypnotized into believing certain roles or certain belief sets. So we're not inquisitive enough. We're not looking for the real exit. We're in just enough trance to get on with life and to kind of be satiated by the false exits. And that's why, I mean, again, Gurdjieff, going back to him because he seems to be the man of the day in this talk, he said awakening is bitter. which is in a way, in a sense, I can understand that, because it's not about being comfortable. It's about understanding the situation. But a lot of people, they get glimpses of like what's happening, and it makes them anxious. It makes them, even some people have gone a bit crazy if they've kind of woken up too quickly. What is necessary for any person who wants to be more aware is to first work on themselves, I would say, to have a grounded psychological, mental, emotional state. So you're prepared. So whatever you learn after that, whatever journey you go on, a journey of self-discovery, you're not shaken off the path. You're not kind of, you're not kind of worried too much, or you're not pushed into fear, because you have to be aware that there's certain knowledge and responsibility that comes with getting perception. So I think you're right, is that you can be targeted, but if, that's why don't run before you can walk. Making sure that I would say that we're emotionally grounded. But of course, that's more and more difficult, because the food that we're being fed by society is exactly the opposite, to make you emotionally excitable, to make you kind of mentally unfocused, to make you physically unhealthy. And so, because then you don't have the kind of the proper, let's say, preparation to continue down the hero's journey. So that's something I'd add there, Derek.
I think this is just wonderful conversation, and I think the importance of it to me is that, as I said before, if I go for these long periods of time without any sympathetic contact, it can be difficult to maintain. I think it's a testament to how tough these times are, because human beings are not meant to be isolated for the most part. I think you have examples of certain monks and rishis who maybe are very dedicated to the spirit, but again, we talk about there's a time for that and there's a time for being in the world. And myself, I don't think it's my path to be a hermit somewhere, and I think there are very few these days who are, and we probably don't hear about them, and they're probably doing lots of energetic and subtle work for us. That being said, it's very difficult to hold on to one's internal frequency when there's such a dearth of sympathetic resonance. And so even just our correspondence and talking about it, it seems like such a small thing, because, for it takes you and I such a small fraction of our time to send our emails, and this is a little bit of a longer form. But, relative to the rest of the week, it seems like such a small thing. And again, this comes back to that paradox, and we're using the technology in such a constructive way here. And so that even something that seems so small will continue, it'll help me on my way in such in an inversely large way. And it's a testament to how potent the sympathetic frequencies are. And of course, I would assume that means how easy it is for the dissonant frequencies to drag you down. And so these things that seem trivial are, of course, truly not trivial at all. And it's just so easy to forget that. Over.
Yes, I mean, I agree what you say. There's, the wisdom traditions say that our responsibility is to be in the world, yet not of the world, i.e., physically in the world, but obviously not of the same frequency. That, I mean, there are those people who do good work as monks, and they choose to go into retreat, especially, for example, the monks on Mount Athos, and and they do great work. But there's also a great need for people to be in the world, because then you can carry that frequency into the world. But like you say, and I think it is necessary to be able to find those kind of sympathetic correspondences, so you don't become despondent, and you can kind of hook into the right energy source rather than being drained. That's why anyone who emails me like yourself, I always respond, because I think it's part of our role to kind of be part of the network of connecting with people. And when you said when you wanted to take it further and say let's have a conversation, I asked you, I said, well, just on the off chance, let's record it, and if we feel like, if we agree, and with your permission, we can put it out. And I think this will be a great conversation to make available, because it's also allowing other people to connect with the conversation and to find the correspondences and to feel like, yes, I want something like this to give me, give me the faith, or to feel like I'm on the right path, and to understand that I don't have these thoughts alone. And I think that's part of what we need to do now, is to find like-minded people, and like-souled people, I should say, and to kind of find the resonance that feeds you, and to break off the entanglements that drain and reduce your energy. And that's pivotal for what's happening in the world right now, because we are in that situation where we've been pulled into one energetic domain or the other. And so I think we're probably having a timely conversation. And if you agree to it, we can perhaps make this available for others.
Yeah, I think I'm perfectly happy to do that. And I think it's just going to help grow the flame to a sustainable degree, because of course it could never be this sort of, well, I think I'm digressing here, but it could never be some sort of, as soon as you see something on Instagram, you get suspicious, but your website and a lot of these other people that I mentioned, I never had that feeling, because it felt like it's just, I had to find it for myself. I couldn't have, it wasn't suggested to me by the algorithms. And I think this is a good place to leave off here. And I wanted to say, as a concluding note, in my own experience, that at first, when you begin to take back your energy, take back your awareness, take back your life force, it seems that you make minimal gains. And this again goes back to the muscle analogy. And it's true. You take back a little bit, you get a little bit, you gain a little bit of ground, but you quickly find yourself back where you started, and it's easy to get discouraged, because but each time you get a little further, every time you continue, each day that you continue with this, you find yourself a little further. And when you look back over a larger scale, myself, I can look back a few years now, I would say 7 or 8 years since I really got serious about these sort of things. And I think I'm, much further along than I was then. And it's only on the day-to-day basis you can feel that you aren't making much progress. And this is actually something which I've read somewhere. You learn at first in small bits, and they get bigger and bigger, and the progress becomes more, you go up in larger intervals. Of course it feeds itself. It's a feedback loop. So that's my concluding thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, and I say yes. I mean, it's exponential. When you kind of strengthen the wavelength or connect with others, it's exponential, and these correspondences, all help to that. And I don't have Instagram. I don't have an Instagram account or any Twitter account. So if I put this out, it'll be on my Substack and everything, for free kind of podcast. So you never know. People may say, I really enjoyed this, and I want to try to reach out to Derek and connect with him. We don't know what things happen. Little drops in the ocean eventually can become waves on the shore. We don't know where it's going, but so we just go with the flow and with the energy, and as you say, that accumulates. So Derek, been great chatting with you. Thanks for bringing
Yes,
forth these
likewise.
subjects, and if fate is kind to us, then probably we'll chat again and continue the conversations. If just one other person gets a benefit from listening to us, then I feel that we've done well, and that's good for the ongoing flow of these sympathetic correspondences. So thanks again, and we'll stay in touch as always.
Yes, thank you. I feel that we've already succeeded. I feel like this has helped me immensely.